I'm not going to say why I don't want any adult ever again to use the expression, it's always in the last place you look. It doesn't. Think about it. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, all right, we'll start there. Hey, Hockey World. It is Friday, October 3rd, 2014.
I'm Michael Agello.
I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today.
I'm Ty Anderson.
Oh, I'm Josh Strimmer.
And I'm Eklund, and you're watching the HockeyBuzzCast on HockeyBuzz.com, and that sound you hear is my wife putting our next door neighbor into a wood chipper. But don't worry, we're fine.
It's okay, I have my cleaning lady in the background.
Yeah, that's I don't know what that is. It shouldn't be a problem. What does that mean? All right, anyway,
That was the theme song from Rocky IV.
Yeah, that's my ringtone. Sorry, guys. I put it on vibrate.
Ringtone is the themes. Well, we're not even going to go into this, Josh. What's wrong with that?
That's fine.
Of all the Rockies, you picked Rocky IV.
Actually, yeah. It's a good tune.
That's the one where they do...
Actually, that's from Over the Top, I think. Isn't it?
No, it's not from Over the Top.
What Rocky is that? He beats a robot, right? Or he takes up the cooking course, or what is it? I forget.
That's the Ivan Drago Rocky.
Yeah. No. Okay, I don't know.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Ignore that sound. Let's get right into the Atlantic Division, because this is a division of, we're going to talk about those fine teams. Gosh, I'm so sorry. That sound's going to stop soon. We're going to talk about those teams on the Atlantic coast, like the Islanders and Flyers, and we're not. We're talking about the Atlantic Division, which is not all the teams on the Atlantic Ocean, but some of them. And it's easy enough to start here with our buddy Ty, and the not only are they alphabetically the first team in the division, but they are predicted by many to be the first team in the division, the Boston Bruins. Now, their key additions are none. They added no one that I could find. I was trying to think, but I couldn't think of anyone that was really significant. Their key loss is Jarome Iginla, and a piece of their soul for losing last year and not getting to the conference finals, which is where many predicted them to end up. So Ty, you've been there for preseason. You've seen the mood around the team. Are they focused in?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it took a little while, I think, to get over last year and to put it behind you. But I think this team is recharged and they're ready. Most notably, Brad Marchand looks like he really conditioned himself back to the shape he was in, say, 2-3 years ago, when he was Brad Marchand that Boston fell in love with. So he's a big guy that's back. Louis Eriksson's healthy. Carl Soderberg is there. So they have a lot of promise for this year, and this is the first time in a while they've had a lot of young guys competing for spots. So that's obviously been the storyline of camp. Simon Gagne was an invite. He's still hanging around. Ville Laino was cut earlier this week. So they have some options sort of opening up here, but for the most part, this is the same team that was a President's Trophy winning team last year.
Yeah, so this is so Simon Gagne. Do you think is he going to make the team?
It sounds like he might if it can work out financially. Just because he doesn't sound like a player that needs a lot of money, or he doesn't really want a guaranteed a ton of money. He just wants to get back in the NHL, and I think that Boston gives him that chance. We'll see, though. Today he was on a fifth line, which is never really a good sign, I find. But yeah. I think all things.
You're going to play 5 lines.
Yeah, exactly. But I think when you look at the roster and you see how it kind of shakes out, that bottom 6 doesn't have a whole lot of scoring punch right now. So they might want to keep a guy like Gagne around just to see what they can get out of him, whether it's on the 3rd line, the 4th line, or if he's a power play specialist. They did lose Iginla off that power play, which is a big loss, all things considered. So a guy like Gagne may help out in that category for sure, but we're still waiting for the exact word.
So you said they were using him on the point in the power play a little bit too, right?
Yeah, he was playing on the point on the power play, which was an interesting look for him. Then when they sort of iced a more complete roster, their last preseason game with more of their NHL regulars, he went down to about 2 minutes of total power play ice time, which again is still nothing to really sneeze at. It's still a pretty good chunk of time out of 13 minutes. Yeah. So he's a guy that I think honestly could be used in that role. Especially, it all kind of depends how the power play shakes out this year. Last year, Riley Smith played on the point in the power play. He's back with the team, so he might go back to that spot of the ice. But without Iginla, you might have Eriksson shift up to the top line and have Gagne go on the right side of the second unit. So we'll see. But I honestly think that there is a spot for Gagne on this team.
I'd like to think so. I mean, I like Simone Gagne, and I'm pulling for him. I think he's not only a good player, he's a good person, and he also. It also doesn't hurt, even if he's not playing all the time, to have one of the guys that you bring in when injuries happen to be a veteran. Like not necessarily to go to all younger players. And I think that that's part of their thinking, because I know their stable is pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, for the most part, I mean, this team has young guys like Seth Griffith, Ryan Spooner, Koklachev, Frazier. I mean, these are players that are really, most of them have a handful of games, if that, to their name. I know Ryan Spooner's like the veteran of that group. He has 23 games NHL experience. So they might not want to go all in with their youth this year and kind of season them into it. And a guy like Gagne gives them that ability to mix and match here and there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Kevin, before you're ravaged by your pit bull, in the background, is it safe? This is my thinking on Boston. And tell me if I'm crazy. That Boston is the most Western Conference team in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I mean, I'll buy into that. At least enough to think about it for a while. But I think even in this parity world, where I think a lot of teams have the ability to believe they have a chance to win the cup. I think there are still 5 really elite teams, and I think Boston is one of those teams. And even though they didn't add anybody, it sort of feels like they did, because Chiarelli, I thought, as I mentioned before, pulled off a bit of magic when he got Torrey Krug and Smith to sign, the contracts that they did. So he wasn't forced into making another deal that would have taken away from the team. Hamilton's going to be better. Torrey Krug is going to get better as well. I think Rask still has room to grow. So this was a very strong team with probably one of the top 3 coaches in the league in Claude Julien. I think after Lemaire left, Julien, in my mind at least, took over as the best defensive coach, at least in terms of preparing a team to play defense, in the league today. So, they've got a lot going for it. I think Chiarelli has always been an underrated general manager. Sean Thornton will be missed by the media. He was a good role player, but, Boston's such a good team that's just a blip on the radar as well. So I like this team a lot. I liked it last season. I've liked it for a long time, and they'll be there as well. But I think they'll have somebody pushing them this season in the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Let's slide down or slide across the state of Pennsylvania, across 90 through the Berkshires, as they would say, and over to Buffalo, where Mike, you sit, and Buffalo Sabres, who finished last year 21, 41, and 10, 8th in the Atlantic, missed the playoffs, and were 20 games under 500. Their key additions are Matt Molson, Brian Giunta, Josh Georges, Nazaras, and Sam Reinhart, if he's going to play. And their key loss is Christian Ehrhoff, who they surprisingly moved or bought out. I thought one of the big surprises was them buying out Christian Ehrhoff, who I thought they would have wanted to keep there for this rebuild. It doesn't hurt to have a quality defenseman who's not making a whole lot of money, but they bought him out anyway. Their question, I guess, is are they going to tank? That seems to be what you say. I don't believe teams tank, but at all. So I'm not going to say they're not going to tank, but what are your thoughts, Mike? On you've seen them in some preseason games here. What's going on?
Well, first of all, I don't think Sam Reinhart's going to make the team. I think he's going to get sent back to the Western Hockey League. I think Tim Murray did an effective job of getting the team to the cap floor without significantly improving them enough that they're going to really challenge.
Yeah, that's what he said. I think when he came in to interview for a job, that's what he said. I'm going to get them to the cap floor without significantly improving them.
Right, which is a difficult thing to do. But when you're paying Andre Mazzaros $4.25 million,
That is what you're doing, yeah. I guess.
Yeah, that's what you're doing, and it's a good plan. I mean, I like the direction that the Sabres are going. Tim Murray inherited some young players. He brought in some young players. I think Reinhart's going to be a fine pro. They have young players in Ristolainen on defense. Zadorov, a former first-round pick, who's a very good young player, but will probably get sent back to the London Knights. Grigorenko, their other former first-round pick, is probably going to make the team this year. But the overall picture here is the team did not get significantly better than they did last year, and last year they finished dead last. Now they bring back Molson. Chris Stewart is an unrestricted free agent. Drew Stafford is an unrestricted free agent, which means either they sign them or they probably trade them before the deadline. Tyler Ennis is their number one center. Their goaltending is worse without Ryan Miller. It's Enroth and Michael Neuwirth. I think what's going to happen is they're going to start the season with a lot of these, the Zach Dalfies and the Andre Benoits as the depth players, and then as the season goes on, they'll start to bring the kids in. But and you're not going to get Ted Nolan to tank, and you're not going to tell these players we don't want you to win. But again, they didn't make the team good enough to really be competitive. And they bring in a veteran in Josh Georges, who's a leader. They bring in Brian Giunta, who Aki, you said during the playoffs was on empty. His tank was on empty.
I thought losing it. I just felt like as I've been a Giunta fan for a long time. He's killed the Flyers. He used to kill the Flyers. And I thought his game was diminishing quickly.
Right. Now people around here will say it's typical Buffalo that they'll point towards. Point towards last place, and they'll actually compete for a playoff spot. But honestly, I don't see it. You've got some young players here I think will improve, but I think they'll be in contention for the McDavid-Eichel Cup more than the Stanley Cup this year.
Gotcha. Josh?
Yeah, I agree with Mike and what he said about the younger guys improving. I think two guys who are going to have bounce-back years for the Buffalo Sabres. I really like Tyler Ennis. I've always liked this kid. He's kind of taken a step back the last couple of seasons, but I think he's looked pretty good in preseason in the games I've watched, and I've seen him all over the score sheet a lot as well. I still think this kid could be, a 60, 65-point forward. Grigorenko was a huge disappointment last year, and I think he could have a bounce-back year. I don't think could score as many points as Ennis at this point right now, but I think he could be a valuable asset to the Buffalo Sabres and could be maybe a 40, 45 point guy. Those are the two guys that I could see, making some strides this year.
Yeah, I could see that. Now let's slip even further now to the West, not too far, to Detroit, where the Detroit Red Wings, who came over to the Eastern Conference last year, given us the fear of that they would have some sort of magic sauce because they were from the West and everybody from the West is better. Their key addition, in my opinion, is Anthony Mantha, who is injured right now, but is I think going to be a player and a half. And their key losses, they really didn't lose much. They lost Legwand and they lost Bertuzzi, and both of whom were not really big factors last year, I wouldn't say. Legwand came over at the deadline, of course. They lost 421 man games last year to injury, which is a record for them, and they were completely. It was amazing that they made the playoffs, and they did make. I thought everybody felt like Babcock had his best year of coaching. Now the season started. No Daniel Alfredsson. I guess he's another key loss. You could say at this point we still don't know whether he's a key loss or what he is going to do. Mantha and Datsuk are both hurt right now. But you still have Jimmy Howard. You still have some serious talent on this team, and you still have a lot of heart. So, Kevin, what have you? I know you don't watch preseason games, but what are your feelings of Detroit going into the year?
Well, I think everybody who has made their projections about what the Red Wings are going to do as if they know are lying, because I think they're the biggest mystery team going. I mean, basically what they're doing now is merging, the veteran players, the key guys, Datsuk and Zetterberg, with the young players who really stepped up last season and got them in the playoffs. And it's really difficult to know where the Red Wings are at. And I think they're a real mystery team. I think they're going to actually be better than people think they are. I think there's a lot of predictions of doom that they have finally hit the wall, and their streak of 23 consecutive playoff appearances is in jeopardy. But this is still a decent offensive team. I think a team that will have the puck most of the time once Datsyuk gets back from injury. Zetterberg is still among the most competitive guys in the league, and I was interested to note in TSN. I forget the analytics guy they hired now. Someone help me out. The new guy.
Travis Yost.
Yeah. He did an interesting piece where he pointed out the even strength save percentage on Jimmy Howard, which I found to be quite interesting because, to me, it's been my observation that his troubles are always on the power play. He just doesn't seem to be able to make that big save on the power play. So the perception of him is, that he is not a top 10 goalie. But, certainly he had a poor season last year. But I think they're a playoff team. They're certainly not a caliber of a Tampa Bay or a Boston. But I think, they could push Montreal. I think the big question will be defense. It's essentially the same defense as they had last season. It's a veteran group, and they've got some young players, coming up. They like Marchenko. They like Sproles. I mean, there's guys that they're going to try to promote and work in maybe 20 games as well. So if the defense plays well, they'll be a playoff team, but I don't see them as a premium Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah, to me, I'm kind of with you, and I think that's what's interesting about this team is that they've always managed to keep this playoff streak alive by transitioning groups of players, right? And they brought this group up when the Yzerman group was coming down. Now this group, Datsyuk and Zetterberg, are getting older, and they've got Nyquist, and they've got Tatar and DeKeyser and Sheehan, and they've got these guys who are moving up, So can they? It's like a juggling match. Can those guys get to the level where they need to be before the others fall off the map, and that keeps them in the playoffs? That's the battle here, right?
Yeah, they almost have too many forwards because the way it works out now is Jurko, who I think is one of the keys to the future for them. He's the only guy they can send down to the minors, and they've got 14 forwards. They really are in sort of, they almost need an injury or two because I think Jurko needs to start up and play with Tatar and Nyquist in that group. That's his group, and he needs to play with them. So they're an intriguing team, and I think in the Eastern Conference, if they're in the Western Conference, they might be in a little more trouble. But in the Eastern Conference, I think they'll make the playoffs.
Josh?
Yeah, I agree 100% with Kevin and the Detroit defense. By the way, 23 years ago today, it was Konstantinov and Nick Lidstrom's first Detroit Red Wings game. I guess no surprise that the Red Wings never missed the playoffs when Lidstrom was a Red Wing. But they still have not replaced Lidstrom on the back end. I mean, yeah, you have Kronwall back there, but after that, I mean, nothing really exciting. The Red Wings are still waiting for their younger guys to kick it up. We've been waiting on Brendan Smith for a while now, Jakob Kindle, Jonathan Eriksson. I mean, they signed Danny DeKeyser. He was an all-star in college, but he wasn't an offensive guy. But he's become an offensive guy because there's no one really there that's really taking the reins. But like I said, I agree with Kevin. They never have improved the back end. I don't see Detroit making the playoffs at all this year.
Well, I think, honestly, I think a big thing to look at with Detroit is that they really didn't have Stephen Weiss last season. And he's the guy that they brought in, and they expected big things from him. So on top of the progression of the young guys, like a Nyquist, a Jurko, even a Thomas Tatar, now you bring Weiss back into it, and I think that sort of can be a big X factor for them this season. They lost in the first round of the Bruins. There was a 5-game series loss, but they played them hard. I mean, that was a tough series, and Mike Babcock, talking to him after that series, he talked about how that was a great thing for the kids to go through. That's a young team, and they needed something like that. And they need to learn how you have to grow when the playoffs come to you. And that's really kind of what I think you saw last season. And I want to see if that carries over into this year, because if that does, that can make a huge difference over an 82-game stretch.
Well, Ty, the big question is, and you always talk about sophomore slumps. You had all these rookies come in. I mean, Nyquist was one of the more dominant players in the league in the second half of the season, and Tatar and Jurko and DeKeyser, who was basically a rookie. Sophomore slumps are a thing because there is a name for it because it is a consistent thing that happens in professional sports. And if these young kids take a step back and you have the same amount of injuries that this team has had with Datsuk, with Zetterberg, with Johan Franzen over the years, there's no support structure to keep them. I mean, I have them as a bubble team in the playoffs. I've never been a Jimmy Howard fan, but he had a real up and down year last year, and you can't really depend on Jonas Gustafsson to step up and take care of that if Jimmy Howard drops the ball. And I don't know how much to factor in the Babcock scenario, because Kenny Holland came out today and said it's pretty unlikely that they're going to get something signed before the beginning of the regular season, and how much his contract situation will be a distraction going through the season and into next year. So they'll be a very interesting team to watch.
I don't see
it. I think it'll be zero.
Yeah.
A distraction for the players. He's just as important as he is to the organization, and he is important. Like Eck mentioned it earlier about people believe it was his best coaching effort last season to get the team in the playoffs. Like that's his forte, to prepare teams and get them in. But he's not the guy like if the players wouldn't lose any sleep if they lost him. Like I don't think anyone will. It's not. No one's going to be talking about it during the regular season. The media might, but the players, there'll be no discussion of it.
Ty, you brought up a really good point with Boston in this whole thing, because I heard, and I never thought about it until you said it, but I heard at least 4 different instances. The Flyers said it at one point in a press conference. I heard the Islanders say it at a press conference. I heard Tampa say it at a press conference, and now you're saying Babcock said it. Where last year the Bruins were a lot. How many people came out and said playing the Bruins teaches us what we need to do to compete? It's a fascinating thing. It's one of these things. It's something about the Bruins that they have, and I remember when I wrote it at one point when the Flyers had a late season game against the Bruins, a really good game. They were behind. They came back in. LeCavier had a couple goals. It was an afternoon game. It was pouring rain here in Philly. We were all trapped. We lost our electricity. I remember it was a crazy day, but the Bruins ended up winning on a shootout. But I remember during that game, I felt like that game prepared the Flyers for the playoffs better than any other game had the entire season, where it was just like this team now. And that's something. It's something when you have a team that can say that everybody says that about. That's something. Well,
the Bruins sort of typify what playoff hockey is all about. I mean, their style of play is teams always talk about playing differently, but the Bruins do it. Like they play one way during the regular season, which is very successful, but they're just hard. They have a hard edge to them when they play in the postseason.
They are something. That must be fun to be around.
Toronto knows that pretty well there, Kevin.
Yeah, right. There you go. That's that too.
Yeah.
Florida. Let's move on to Florida now. Going down alphabetically. The Panthers, which actually do exist. There are actually Wildcats in Florida, I found out the other day. I didn't realize this, but that's the only place in North America where Wildcats do still roam. I wondered about why they had this name, so I looked it up. There's a whole lot of Panthers still in Florida. That's just an aside for you not horticulturalists. That wouldn't make any sense. Anyway, the key additions are most of their offense and most of their defense. They added Jussi Jokinen, David Bolin, Willie Mitchell, and Aaron Ekblad, not to mention their biggest addition, which was, Gerard Gallant, and of course you can actually Sean Thornton throw him in there as well. Derek McKenzie. There's a lot of players they added, so these are all new players. Gallant is the big one, though. They lost Tom Gilbert and Ed Jovanovski. So I guess the thing, with the Penguins, they have some really outstanding young players, and they really when you look at some of their young kids, their draft pick from last year, Huberdeau's coming along, he's getting better, obviously, but man, I was really impressed with, and why can't I think of his name? The draft pick.
Barkov.
Barkov. Thank you. Sorry, Barkov is he's a star. He's going to be an NHL star. And when they drafted him, I was surprised, and they made the right pick in my mind. They made the right pick there. But we've had 5 years now of Florida Panther hockey that where I don't think the teams would recognize each other if they pass themselves in the mall. These teams have nothing to do with one another. 5 totally different Florida Panther teams. Dale Talon, Kevin, I'm a big believer in Talon and how he can build teams. So, Florida's. There are some people who think that this team could actually battle for a playoff spot, and there's others who say not a chance. Where are you, Kevin?
Well, I'm about halfway between those two positions. I think they're an improved team. for a variety of reasons. Let's leave aside the fact that they overpaid to get those players, which is certainly true. But they have to overpay. We've talked about this many times in order to get players to come there. But if you're going to sign guys like Bolin and Jokinen are both guys who at least will help you in all three zones of the ice. And I think those are the kinds of players that the Panthers needed to add, even though they did overpay for them. And as you mentioned, they have Bukestad and Barkov and Huberdeau. There's some real interesting offensive talent, all young. But so there's a lot to at least think about. But the key for me is Luongo. Like, the difference in the save percentage last season between when Luongo played for the team and when they had their other cast members playing is remarkable. If he comes in and posts a 920, 921, 922 save percentage, I think the team could at least make some noise and at least be far more competitive than they were. I think it's still an uphill battle. I don't see them making the playoffs, but I think they made some inroads, and this new ownership has given them the cash. They went out and spent some money, and I think we all know that that's not an instant cure. But I think they'll be much more competitive. It'll come down to defense. That defense still needs some work, and Ekblad obviously was a great draft pick, but he's not the type of guy who's going to be able to, he's not going to be Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, right. Josh?
Yeah, I also want to point out Gerard Gallant. I'm a big fan of Gerard, always have been. And the last few years, he's brought a lot to the teams that he's been behind the bench. I mean, Montreal Canadiens as an assistant coach, a lot of people thought that he was a big reason why the Canadiens were playing so well. And then before that, head coach of the St. John Sea Dogs, and he won 2 championships there. He's a great coach. A lot of the players love him. I remember when he first began his coaching career when I was doing play-by-play in color for the Hemphill Pontiac Summerside Capitals of the Maritime Junior Hockey League. Say that 20 times fast.
Wow.
When Gerard was coach of the Caps there in Summerside, PEI, and I was doing broadcasting there, and I got to see firsthand as a coach, and I said to myself, that was 1997, I said, this guy's going to be an NHL coach eventually. And sure enough, he's paid his dues. He was a head coach with the Columbus Blue Jackets for 3 seasons. Yeah, he didn't do so well there, but I don't think he had a lot to work with then. But I really think that Gerard's going to do well in Florida.
Kevin, you've known Gerard Gallant since he was a player. Were you surprised about this player to coach transition?
Oh, no, not at all. This was a guy that you could tell, much like I've mentioned about Patrick Waugh, just had fire in his belly, like a guy that loved to compete. And there's been a drumbeat around the NHL about him as well. I mean, you talk to the players who have played for him, and they really, really like him, and they see him as a guy they want to play for. And he's got a little bit of a hard edge to him, and I think the most successful coaches are those that can still communicate with the players, don't alienate them, they walk the line, a fine line, but also get the most out of them. And I think Gallant will be able to do that. And let's face it, like, talent had options. I mean, Dan Bylsma was out there, who has the Stanley Cup on his resume, but he opted to go with Gallant, and I think that speaks volumes about him.
I agree. All right, so next up we go back to the surprise of last year from this division, the Montreal Canadiens, who went to the conference finals. They have added Tom Gilbert and P.A. Parenteau in the offseason. They lost some kind of big players to their team, and I mean, it's arguable, I guess. Vanek wasn't that big of an impact. Georges Gianta, who was their captain, Danny Briere, wasn't that big of an impact with them. That they lost Gerard Gallant as well. So that these teams are connected at the hip that we just talked to here. And Gallant would love nothing more than to finish ahead of the Canadiens in the standings. So I think that there's a little bit of a story to follow there. Ty, your team got eliminated by Montreal last year. How do you see them this year?
Firstly, thanks for that reminder.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, almost blocked it out. Thanks. Montreal confuses me. There are games where I watch and I think they look like a great team, clicking on all cylinders. And there are other nights where I watch it and I think that this coach has no idea what he's doing. So they're kind of I put them in that group with Detroit, with Toronto even, where you don't know what you're going to get this year. I think you can be really good or really bad. I think I've said this 1,000 times now. I don't really believe in Michel Therrien as a great NHL coach. I think he gets you to a certain point as a team, and then you need to bring someone else and take that next level. We'll see if Montreal has reached that level yet. But there's a lot of things to be excited about at the same time. PK is an unbelievable player. I think you're really starting to see what Galchenyuk and Lars Eller and Gallagher can do for your team. Thomas Plekanec is still, I think, one of the most underrated centermen in the NHL. So there are pieces there. I like Tom Gilbert. I think it's a good addition as well. So we'll see, I think, up and down the roster. But I think at the end of the day, it all comes back to Carey Price. And if he can stay healthy and if he can play like the player that he was against Boston in that series, then that'll be interesting to see how they play out over the season.
Yeah, you see, to me, and I mean, I'm not going to go into my Therrien rant today. Promised I wouldn't, but I will say this, that I feel like Carey Price is getting better every year, which is crazy because he's been such a great goalie. But just talking to people up there too who are playing with him in this preseason, they think he's better this preseason than he was last year. There's just this incredible trajectory. Normally, you'd expect a guy at some point to sort of level off, Carey Price, I think, got more confident last year when he won in the Olympics, and I think he finally believes in himself. And I think that has taken his whole play to another level. And as much as I don't really think the Canadians have a whole lot of talent up front, and on the defensive end they've got Subban, but they, and Emlyn I like a lot, but beyond that, there's not a whole lot there either. They've got Carey Price, and as long as Carey Price is healthy, and that's the big thing. That's the big if. If Carey Price isn't healthy, they're not a playoff team. In no way, shape, or form. In my mind, Mike.
Carey Price is going to have to be great for this team to make the playoffs. I know we're going to have our predictions on Wednesday, but Montreal is a team that I predict to have the biggest regression this year because not only the leadership that they lost, but the fact is, you look at this team and where are they getting the goals from? I mean, I think Pacioretty, I think Plekanec are pretty good forwards. They're going to need Galchenyuk to step up. They're going to need Brendan Gallagher to probably score 20 goals. Guys like Lars Eller, he's never going to score consistently. He never has. Rene Bourque stepped up big time in the playoffs, but he's never stepped up in the regular season with Montreal. PK is one of the best defensemen in the league, but the depth really isn't there. I don't know what they're going to get out of these young guys like Nathan Beaulieu and Jared Tenorti. It's all really on the shoulders of Price and Subban, and the weight that they carry is great. And if they stumble or if they get hurt, I think this team is definitely missing the playoffs. But even if they stay healthy, I don't know if they have enough weapons to make the playoffs.
I mean, there's been a lot of talk of what's his name, Tenorti, right? Who's been in there? Who's huge? He's another like Chara type player, right? But he's still really young and still looks a little bit like a newborn deer, like out there. So he'll be good eventually. But there's a lot. Kevin, can you bring any happiness to the Montreal? Because we're kind of like a little grim on Montreal here, but
yeah. Well, I kind of feel the same way. I have them in the group right there with Toronto and Detroit as well, fighting it out, and I actually think Detroit may be better. The best thing you could say is they had the same problems last year and they overcame them. I mean, did we really think Montreal was going to score a lot of goals last year? But they've seemed to find enough. Their biggest problem to me is I think they're underestimating George's ability on defense there. I think he was a leader, and I also think he was a pretty credible, steady, stable force back there. And I think you need that on a defense with Subban. And they need two things in my mind. They need Subban to take another step up, which I think he will do. The fact he was willing to go back to Montreal and has really cast his lot there, I think he still sort of feels like he needs to show everybody, and that's how you want. We've always had sort of, some people see it as a negative, but I've seen it as a positive, his enthusiasm that sometimes gets carried away. But I also think Galchenyuk has another year or two, and I think we could see him. You asked me who I thought was going to have a breakthrough year, and I said Nikushkin, but Galchenyuk would have been my second choice. I think he's ready to be a premium offensive player. So, I think they're going to make the playoffs. I don't think they're going to miss.
Okay, and now let's move to Ottawa, who move down the line to Ottawa Senators fans who used to be Montreal Canadiens fans before the Senators had a team. But now they're Ottawa Senators fans, and their key additions are Alex Chiasson, who was part of the trade, the Spezza deal, and a lot of people I do think Chiasson is underrated, and I think that was a hard player for Dallas to give up. From everybody I talked to, Dallas, he did not want to move Chiasson, but he did. And Dave Legwand, who is very much a role player, but good, solid player to add to your team. Losses are Spezza and Hemsky, two scorers. Leaving them with the first line of Bobby Ryan, Kyle Torres, and Clark MacArthur. And I mean, as much as I'm a big Bobby Ryan fan. He's a top line center. I wouldn't say that Kyle Torres and Clark MacArthur are top line players. That this is a team that has very, very little depth up front at all. In my mind, defensively, of course, they have one of the best in the game. But my thoughts on this one is this is a team that is going to be battling for the final right with Buffalo at the end for the Connor McDavid sweepstakes. But that's where I think Ottawa is going to be this year. Kevin, thoughts?
I'm with you on that. I think the loss of Spezza is just significant. In this parity league, to lose that much of an offensive force, you can't replace it. And I thought you made just a great point yesterday when you started talking about scoring by committee. That's a euphemism that we got nothing. And it's they just everybody's going to have to pick it up. That's what they're saying, but it won't be enough. Every team in the league has two strong offensive lines, and I don't see the Senators with that second line. That first line will be okay. They'll produce enough goals. And when you start rating the goaltenders in that division as well, you got their goaltending down at either 6 or 7. It's just not up there with. I mean, it's credible, it's stable, but it's not Carey Price, it's not Ben Bishop, it's not Tuukka Rask. So when you start adding it all up, I agree. I had to list 5 teams early on about in the Connor McDavid, Jack Eichel sweepstakes. By the way,
yes, we should. I agree with you.
Or even Noah Hannafin, who I think is going to be a good player as well. But I think Ottawa can safely say they're in contention to get one of those big 3 players.
Yeah. Is there anything about Ottawa that scares you, Ty?
Carlson. I mean, beyond that, it's sort of a mess, I think. You look at their forward core, you'd want to see a guy like Mika Zibanejad or even Peugeot take their game up a notch and solidify their spot in this roster as a second-line player, as a third-line player even. But it just seems like there's that log jam on that roster, especially with the role players they add with Legwand and even with Zach Smith, who they really like. That's going to be tough for one of these players to break in and establish themselves, I think. But Chiasson is a good player. The Bruins really wanted him in that Sagan trade.
Yeah.
He's a BU product. They were really high on him. They weren't able to get it. They got Riley Smith instead. So I guess it all sort of worked out. But that was a big player that they wanted. So it'll be interesting to see him in the Atlantic Division. I almost said Northeast. But beyond that, though, I mean, Craig Anderson, it seems like he has his flashes of brilliance, and then that's followed up with an 885 for a month.
Right.
So he's a tough guy, I think, to put your faith in. And I like Robin Lehner. I think he had a down year last year. So look forward to seeing more of him in net. The bigger goalie, a lot of fun to watch. So we'll see, but it just seems like a lot of things have to go right for this team to even compete, let alone challenge for a playoff spot.
I like Peugeot, right? Yeah, I like him a lot too. I agree with you on that. He has a little bit of Mike Conroy in him, though. To me, that's what I feel like. He's got this talent, and is never going to quite. Mike Conroy was always a frustrating player. I always was a fan of Mike Conroy as a player, and because he had this unbelievable ability to make great plays, and then just wasn't always there. He was a little too small at times, and just looked like he was out of place. I just kind of get the same thing with him. Tampa. Let's move to Tampa, because this is the team that everybody's talking about for sure. They are the sexy pick right now, and which I know thrills Kevin because you picked him. You love picking the sexy picks to win this division. They Key additions, they added a lot for a team that was pretty good last year. They added Anton Strawman, Jason Garrison, Brian Boyle, Brendan Morrow, and Jonathan Druin. Who, of course, Druin is added from within, but still, that's a lot of players to add. I mean, that's a whole line, a whole forward line, and 2 defensemen. So you're looking at that's pretty significant. Their key losses, Teddy Purcell, which I think is a big loss. I think is a big pickup for Edmonton. Lindback, that really just didn't work out there. Ryan Malone, which is a crazy situation, obviously. Sammy Sallow, who sort of is just has still, I think, out there, hasn't signed, correct? And Nate Thompson. So, but the whole thing, and in Tampa, perhaps the best thing, in my opinion, the best thing that could have happened to them last year was getting their butts handed to them by Montreal. I think that, realizing that Ben Bishop, had Ben Bishop carried this team through a round or 2 of the playoffs, maybe they wouldn't have addressed some of the issues, as many of the issues as they did. But I think they addressed a bunch of issues and said, we get Ben Bishop back, we'll be good, but we got to be better anyway. And I think that's what they did. That's what it feels like they did, Mike.
Miak?
Mike, yes, you.
Okay, I didn't.
Sorry.
No, well, honestly, I question whether they did adequately address the issue that's really been a problem for them the last couple of years, which is their defense. Anton Strawman had a good year with the Rangers. They signed him for a pretty pricey deal. They bring in Jason Garrison, who used to play with the Florida Panthers, was not very effective in Vancouver. He's essentially a power play guy. Their Achilles heel has been their blue line for a number of years. I don't think anybody can dispute their forward. Stamkos is one of the best in the league. I like Ryan Callahan as a leader. They have a couple young guys in Palat and Johnson who really stepped up last year. Filppula was a good free agent add. They bring in a veteran like Brendan Morrow last year and Drouin as a rookie. So their forwards are pretty deep.
Yeah.
But it's defense. Matt Carl has been a disappointment. Victor Hedman is the key on the blue line. If he continues to improve, I think they have a good chance of. I think they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to be one of the top 3 in the Atlantic. It's just a question of whether that defense, as it's currently constructed, is good enough to carry them through the playoffs, and whether Ben Bishop has to carry them on his back. And last year, for most of the season, he proved that he could. He's a big guy, and he had a phenomenal season. But I don't know whether that defense is good enough, and that may prevent them from going as far as some people think that they will.
So here's my thing with them, Kevin. I think that Tampa, last year was transitioning out of the Southeast Division. I think there's a big difference between the Southeast that they were in and the division they're in now. And I think what ended up happening is they got beaten by a old school Northeastern Division team in Montreal, and I think that's what kind of threw them. They have the talent, they have the skill, but I think they're going to be better because they're going to be more used to playing in a much different division than they used to play.
Yeah, I can buy into that, and I also buy into what Mike said about defense is key for them, and to me it all comes down as whether they have enough to compete with the Boston Bruins. I do think they're better than everyone else in that division. It's just a matter of whether they've gone far enough to compete with the Bruins, and it'll really come down to how good Bishop is. They believe everything would have been different had Bishop been healthy, and who knows, maybe it would have been, because despite the fact that players always say, we play the same no matter who's in net. We have faith in both of them. That's certainly not true. You adjust everything depending on who's in your net. And, last season they just, once Bishop was gone, it just seemed they lost their confidence. But, Hedman was a player that I think has really exceeded expectations. I remember talking to Guy Boucher when he was a coach, and he said, well, there's too many people thinking he's going to be an offensive style defenseman, and he's not going to be that. He's never going to put points up. Well, guess what? He is putting points up, and I think actually he's going to be even more critically acclaimed for the style of play that he can play now, and I think he's going to be a greater force defensively. But I think Strawman, they brought him in to be a stabilizing force. When you watched him in the playoffs last season, I thought he was one of the more crucial players for the Rangers. Just a very steady player. And sometimes that's what teams need, is sort of the glue to kind of, hold them all together. And I think that's why, Yzerman's a very insightful man, and I think he knew exactly what the team needed. It needed another offensive transition player, which he got in Garrison, and it needed a stabilizing force. And would they have benefited by more talented defensemen? Yes, but they weren't available. Those were the best that were available. So, I don't believe they've gone far enough to take on the Bruins, but I also think that they're, once you get in a playoff series and you get adrenaline going, and you've learned from what going on last season, I still give them a chance. In fact, I've picked them to beat the Bruins in the playoffs.
Yeah, I know, that I saw, and I think that's fascinating. And I agree with you, the Anton Strawman. One of the things that really surprised me last year covering the finals was the amount of, or the lack of respect that Anton Strawman had around the Rangers media. And it was very bizarre. Like, when you talk to them, they're like, yeah, Strawman will be gone. They're not going to bring him back. There's no way they're going to bring him. And meanwhile, you're playing in the Stanley Cup Finals, and you're saying, you guys are watching this, right? Like, this guy is just making an impact out here, just because he's a UFA and he's going to want a lot of money. Maybe you should think. It was bizarre. There was a real total lack of respect for Anton Strawman, so I wasn't surprised that he wasn't back in New York, because you could tell that the media was getting it from somewhere, and that's what you would see. That's what you would guess. So yeah, I think Garrison's a good pickup for them too. And Boyle. I think they made it. And Morrow, they made some interesting moves. They made the kind of moves you make, like Morrow and Garrison, to me, are the kind of moves you make when you think you're ready to take that next step. So that's where they think they are, I would think.
Well, Boyle and Morrow particularly were players picked up to play playoff hockey, to play against the Bruins. And, but I think when you're the trendy pick, and when you feel good about yourselves as the Lightning do, that's why. I think Boston's a better team, but I think Tampa can beat them in a playoff series. That's just because I think they're at that stage now where they're just excited to come to the rink. And it's hard when you've been good for a very long time, as the Bruins have. You've got to create that hunger every year, and the Lightning have the hunger.
Did you guys see the fake third jersey video from the Tampa Bay Lightning?
Yeah, it was great.
That was really funny. They showed the players this fake third jersey that had palm trees all around it, and they just had a camera up high, and they were showing people, and some of the players were like, wow, it's a lot of palm trees. It's like, that's too. They were all trying to be like polite Canadian kids. And they're like, yeah, I guess that looks all right. Maybe a few less palm trees. One guy's like, oh, I would never wear that. That's too many palm trees. And a couple of guys were like, yeah, I can't wait to get these for my friends. These are awesome, It was all a big fit. It was really funny to watch. I liked it. It was well done. You should check it out. It's on NHL.com. So that's it for the. Oh no, I'm just kidding. There's one more team in this division, the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Kevin, if you got to take off, you can take off if you want.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to run, guys. But we'll talk to everyone Monday. Have a good weekend.
See you then. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. So so here we have the Toronto Maple Leafs, who added half their offense and 2 defensemen. They added David Booth, Daniel Winnick, Leo Komarov, Mike Santorelli. On defense, Stefan Robidas, Roman Polak. Their losses on Kuhlman, Raymond, Bolin, and Gunnarsson. Definitely, there was a lot of talk that they were going to do a lot of things, and early on they weren't, but at the end of the day, they did do quite a lot of things this summer. So I guess we'll start with Ty on this one. Let's start with Mike on this one. Mike, can you start with that? Tell me what your thoughts are now going in. You've seen this team in the preseason. What's the attitude?
Well, the attitude is optimistic. The attitude of the fans and the media is skeptical, which is understandable since this team, lost in Game 7 to Boston and then had a playoff spot locked in the middle of March and went 2-12 in the last 14 games. There was a great deal of change, just like you mentioned. The assistant coaches, the assistant general managers, the depth of the team, but the core is pretty much the same. You still have Van Riemsdyk and Kessel and Lupul and Kadri, Phaneuf as your top defenseman, guys like Jake Gardner in there. So the question is whether the new staff, whether the new depth players will have the requisite and intended effect on the Leafs. They bring back a guy like Komarov, who was a pain in the butt to play against. Guys like Daniel Winnick, who is a good two-way forward. I like the additions there. But inherently, what this team needs to do is the players who play the majority of the ice time, like Kessel, like Van Riemsdyk, like Lupul, they have to buy in and play a little more of a two-way game. They can't be all offense and no defense. And if they are, this team is going to allow a lot of shots and put Jonathan Bernier out on an island, to basically save them or they lose. If they don't buy into Randy Carlyle, and Randy Carlyle has been a defensive coach his entire coaching career, that's what he preaches, and he's got a group of players that have yet to buy into what he is preaching. If they do buy in, I think they're a playoff team. I think they could finish as high as even third in the division. If they don't, Randy Carlyle doesn't have a job by Christmas.
All right. From your perspective, Ty, what is it about this team that you see that scares you and that doesn't scare? I guess is the idea.
What scares you, I think, is their top tier talent. I think Phil Kessel. I honestly put him among the top 10 players in this league, maybe even top 5. The way he's played over the past 3 seasons, I think he's an incredible player who really kind of catches a lot of grief. I think some of it's unwarranted. I like James Van Riemsdyk as well. Big body, right in front of the net. He goes toe-to-toe with anybody, and I think that's really respectable quality about his play. And Nazem Kadri, this is a player that I think you still haven't seen the best from, and I think you will this year. Joffrey Lupul, another guy who I think, if he's healthy, is a productive player. So their high-end talent, I think, is nothing to really sneeze at. But now I look at their roster, it looks more complete, which it didn't in years past, I think. A lot of the time it was you had this dead weight on the fourth line and the third line. And I like what they have this year. I like Winnick. I like even David Booth. I think it's a good addition. Stefan Robidas is a nice depth player to have, especially based on what his production was. And if you can get even half of that, from what he used to be, I think he's a solid defenseman to have. But at the same time, I think going back to what Mike said, if they don't buy in, you're going to have 40-something shots a game against this team, and most NHL teams will win those games based on the skill of their shooters. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, over the course of an 82-game season, how and what happens to this Leafs team and their identity, to be specific. What do they become? Are they going to deviate from that high-scoring, upper talent sort of team, or are they going to commit to defense? So we'll see. I think the pieces are there now with a Shanahan and even with their assistant GM to become more of a defensive team. We'll see if the players buy in, though. That's obviously the biggest thing, because you can construct a team no matter how you'd like, but if they don't buy in, they don't buy in. Yeah. So we'll see. But they are such an interesting case, really. I think they might be the most interesting team in the East when you think about what they are and what they can be. So we'll see. But it's their scoring and their lack of defense that concerns me on both, opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. To me, I see it like this. I see it like, you look at this team, you look at Montreal. Montreal's got a better goalie, but they've got a better goalie than everybody. But Jonathan Bernier is no slouch, and Jonathan Bernier can come in there and he can actually, at times last year he looked amazing, and he is a top tier goalie. This is the first time they've gone into a season with a guy who I think they know is a number one goalie. Like, they had Bernier last year, but they weren't sure what they had. Now they know they have a number one goalie. If he can be, 3/4 as good as Price, the rest of this team is better than Montreal, in my mind. With the exception of a couple players, but just line by line, player by player, this is a better team than the Montreal Canadiens. So that's why when I look at the playoffs and I think of those two teams battling it out for that spot, which I think will be one spot because I think there's only 3 teams coming out of this division in the playoffs. So I think, to me, that's one spot that's going to be battled out between Montreal and Toronto.
To me, the key is the maturation of 3 young players: Jake Gardiner, Nazem Kadri in the last year of his bridge deal, and Morgan Riley, a top 5 pick. At the end of the year, when most of their defense was playing terribly, a 19-year-old kid was probably their best defenseman. And hopefully the renaissance of David Clarkson, unlike similar to Stephen Weiss, where Detroit got nothing out of Stephen Weiss, the Leafs basically got nothing out of David Clarkson. It hasn't started great because he had a partially fractured orbital bone in a fight against Buffalo last week, but he's going to be in the lineup for the first game in the regular season. If he scores 15 to 20 goals, Leaf fans will consider it, at least a decent signing, and they'll get something out of a guy that they, signed to a 7-year contract.
I'm with you, and I think especially on the Jake Gardiner and Morgan Riley points, I think those are the keys. And I think it's time for Jake Gardiner to get out of the trade rumors and get into the lineup and play like everybody expects him to play. I mean, he's a young kid still, and defense take a while to develop, and people forget about that. And Morgan Riley is. And there's no question Morgan Riley is going to be a star in the league in my mind, and he's going to get there. But Jake Gardiner's could go either way still, right? And that to me is the issue. With all the rumors about him being traded, if he steps up and is what he should be, then suddenly they haven't. The Maple Leafs have another defense pairing, and it's totally different. It becomes way better because when you have a goalie who can put up like 0.925 save percentages like Bernier can. Ty's right. If you can limit teams to 30 shots, you're going to be in good shape. You're going to give up 40 shots. You're going to give up another goal a game. That's just the reality of it. And that's another goal a game is going to be the difference between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. So it's really pretty basic. The buying in aspect that you guys are talking about is really true. Carlisle, like it or not, like him or not, has to have a relationship with this team. He's got to find a way to get through to him. And he might be a great coach, but if team's not listening, then it doesn't much matter. So that's the whole reality. He's got to come up with a way. And this team, he needs players. He needs conduits is what he needs. Dion Phaneuf's not that guy. Dion Phaneuf's not going to sell the system, and he's the captain of the team, and that to me is a problem.
Well, I'll say this briefly, Ak.
Mm-hmm.
They've had 2 veteran coaches with this core, Ron Wolfson and Randy Carlisle.
Yeah.
Similar coaches in demeanor, not similar coaches in terms of tactics. Both coaches have had difficulty reaching this particular core. At some point, Brendan Shanahan and the management and Dave Nonis have to realize if Randy Carlisle fails this year, he'll be the scapegoat and it'll be his fault because he didn't get through to them. But you know what? It's time that the core takes a bit of a hit for not being able to accept coaching from 2 coaches who had a lot of experience in this league.
Who is that core in your mind?
Kessel, Van Riemsdyk, Kadri, Lupul, Phaneuf.
Okay, but I would say, Phaneuf, I'm with you on, but Kessel and Van Riemsdyk.
Yeah, but you need those.
They're buying into everybody's systems.
But you need those players to play two-way. They can't just be offense. Joffrey Lupul, Kessel, and Van Riemsdyk are fantastic players in the offensive zone. They play 20 minutes a game. But if they don't come back and they don't check and they're not effective, then they're a liability at times out there. And you're going to play those guys all the time. And if you have them out there all the time and they don't play defense, they're going to give up as many goals as they score.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Let's end today with Josh and some news. What do you got, Josh?
A lot of stuff going on, guys. First of all, Nick Kyprios just tweeting out that he's hearing as many as 7 teams are interested in Blackhawks defenseman Nick Leddy, saying Chicago needs to alleviate the NHL cap space, and they're looking for a prospect in return. So let's keep an eye on that, guys. Maybe Nick Leddy could be on the move.
I agree with this, and one of those teams is the Toronto Maple Leafs because I was told that last night. So that's what it's worth. Continue, Josh.
And I'll bet the Islanders are one of the other teams as well, but that's just looking at the landscape.
Maybe Detroit too, or
yes.
if they could fit him in. Injury news, guys. Nikitin with the Edmonton Oilers is going to miss 1 to 2 weeks after he twisted his ankle yesterday, leaving the arena wearing a walking boot. That's a great $4.5 million investment right there. Moving on, I should say. In Toronto, Phil Kessel and Tyler Bozak are both out, upper body injuries. They will not play in the final preseason game tonight against the Red Wings. Stefan Robida will make his debut tonight. In Colorado, Jerome McGinley is nursing a slight ankle injury. Did not play last night against the Kings. No word on his timetable for a return. In Washington, same old story. Mike Green, upper body injury. He did resume practice with his teammates yesterday, but he's still questionable to play in either of the Caps' final preseason games. In Anaheim,
as the great GM once said to me, his injury is all above his eyes. Continue.
Yeah. And in Anaheim, Cam Fowler and Danny Heatley remain out. Fowler with a leg injury, Heatley with groin, both still not skating. Interesting in New York, with number one center Derek Stepan on the sidelines. Marty St. Louis makes his center debut tonight versus the Blackhawks. They needed that number one guy. Speaking of Chicago, no Richards tonight, not injury related. And Kevin Hayes will get to play his former club, even though if you call it a former club because he really didn't play with them.
The club he shunned.
In St. Louis, the Blues have now hired Jason Arnott as a part-time scout, so that didn't take long for Jason to get
somebody
a
else
job.
a couple days ago too. Who else? They hired. Oh man, why can't I think of it? They're on the old American hockey. Is Arnott American? No, the old player. Rap. Go ahead, Josh. Come here.
And back to the Blackhawks. We mentioned it off the air. Danny Carcillo is expected to sign with the Blackhawks tonight. He was signed to a PTO yesterday after being released by the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now,
Nick Leddy rumors, by the way, because in order for them to sign Carcillo, they have to move Leddy. I mean, they were already up against it as it was. So.
And finally, guys, I want to point this out to you. I don't know if either one of you, any of you, saw this, but Ryan Getzlaf was on the Jim Rome show yesterday. And Jim Rome asking Ryan about, Ryan, Teemu Selanne retired. He wrote a book, and I know you've seen that. And Teemu is one of the great players, one of the great guys, and certainly not a controversial figure, yet he was critical of your coach, Boudreau, in the book, and even said that he was bothered by his playing time at certain points and mentioned that he wished you had done more to lobby on his behalf. What was your reaction when you saw some of those passages? Getzlaf responding, it was, what it was. I was pissed off, to tell you the truth. It wasn't great. I thought it was kind of unnecessary for him to come out and say something like that, but at the same time, Teemu doesn't know everything that goes on. He doesn't know how many times that I had conversations about him in the last 2 years to help him to try and get to where he wanted to be. But like I said before, my response is always the same. I'm the captain of the hockey club and not of one player. I don't know what that meant. I have to kind of weigh in where my voice is going to be heard and where it's not. And there's times where I have to step away and just let our coaches and GMs make the decisions and go with it. It's not really my job.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Surprised about that. Getzlaf actually.
That's a lot. That's a lot to swallow right there. But it's not too. It's not. It's kind of the right way to handle it. I think for Getzlaf to answer that question. I think that's probably the best way to answer it.
Yeah. He still has to deal with Boudreau. He doesn't have to deal with Selanne anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And let's not forget. I mean, Teemu is we're starting to get this picture of a guy who as his career ended didn't really think his game was dropping off, which is what you'd expect, right, from a star player. It's not untypical, put it that way. And maybe that there's some, it's I don't know. It's a hard call. I do wish it hadn't been. I wish Teemu hadn't said any of it.
The last person to see when a great player falls, his talent or his ability falls off the table is that great player.
Yeah, of course, and that's definitely the truth.
You didn't see Derek Jeter do that in New York, right? So
well. Derek Jeter is a little sharper than most professional athletes. I mean, I think everybody would agree about that.
Everybody but Ty. Yep. So
overrated.
There you go.
And one other tidbit I meant to mention as well. In line rushes today in San Jose, they have Joe Thornton playing on the fourth line with Brown and Desi.
Wow.
I don't know what that means.
That
means waive your no trade clause, you big.
They are idiots if they do that. I mean, Joe Thornton is not. I mean, he's still one of the top 20 scorers in the NHL. You don't get top 20 scorers in the NHL. They have to realize they got to do better. They got to
act.
Yeah.
That might be like somebody said regarding Scotty Bowman. What did he use as a weapon? He used ice time. If they start playing Joe Thornton fourth line minutes How long do you think it's before he goes into Doug Wilson and says, "Get me the hell out of here"?
Yeah, and they have
not to make the playoffs. That's my answer to that question.
Well, I agree.
They play Joe Thornton 4-5 minutes. They're not making the playoffs.
The forward lines in San Jose were today were Hurdle, Pavelski, McGinn, Marlowe, Couture, Nieto, Goudreau, Tierney, Wingles, and Desi Thornton Brown.
It's preseason. That's all I can say. Let's see what happens.
Thornton might be hurt too. It might just be. Anyway, let's just assume that. For those of you asking back there, today's video game is Hat Trick Hockey, which is really one of my favorites of all time. This is an arcade game that I own. I own this arcade game. And my daughter and I have many a serious heated battle in Hat Trick Hockey, one of my favorites.
I beat you at this one, didn't I?
You beat me at this one, yes, you did. Yesterday's because I forgot to say so during the show, and I set it up and everything, was NHLPA 93, which was like it was right before the NHL 94 game. But remember there was a lockout, there was a strike in there, I guess it was called. So this is when the NHL and the NHLPA weren't getting along. So there was NHLPA 93, and there were no logos in that game, but only players' names and only cities' names. So it's pretty funny. So that's the last of that before EA Sports went to all NHL series. So anyway, that was the little trivia for your video game hockey. Have a great weekend, guys. Man, this is the last weekend we get before it all starts up. We'll be back on Monday. We'll be previewing the Metropolitan Division. Talk to you then.